So let's talk about what is actually going into the PTR. Whenever the PTR does land, whether it's towards the end of this year or early next year, what's actually going to be in there? Let's start with Infestations, the Infestations update. What version of the Infestation updates are players going to get?
So, like I mentioned before, we were mostly focusing on issues that were raised by the players during the last round of PTR. And so one of those was actually a set of issues that came up was there was kind of generally just the idea that infestations that you had to deal with were cropping up like across the map and stuff like that. And so that was kind of a common player complaint, was that a lot of times they were being forced to go across the map to deal with infestations, and it was just way out of the way. It's not where they were spending their time, and so it kind of became this annoyance to have to travel across the map. And you have to spend a lot of resources to go across the map, because not only getting, you're putting characters in danger, but then fuel and all that stuff. So addressing that, the fact that infestations were just often in inconvenient places. There was this kind of general feeling that it was like kind of a game of whack-a-mole, that the players would take out on infestations and then they just keep popping up right back where they were. And it didn't really feel like you had a good amount of effect on the system, and then it didn't feel very reactive to what you were doing. And also generally this idea that, like, we were part of this was trying to tie the plague hearts and infestations and sieges all together into like this one cohesive system. But some of that just wasn't clear to the players. Like, they didn't, like, it wasn't very obvious that that relationship was there. And so we wanted to address those things first and foremost. And so one of the things that we did to kind of try to address all those things at once was kind of tackle this idea of plague hearts awakening. And so essentially the idea being that plague hearts start dormant, that they start out not sending out infestations, not aware of the player at all. And that by going into plague territory and doing things, screwing around, like, killing zombies, getting, the attention of the plague horde, you'd essentially would wake up that plague heart whose territory you were in. So essentially, and then at that point, then that plague heart will start sending infestations out to try to attack you. So kind of the idea here is to, not only like strengthen that connection with the plague hearts and make it feel like it's, reactive to what the player's doing, but make it clear that, okay, this is the plague hearts are what are causing this. And then their awareness of you is what's driving this. But also this, makes it so that we can keep the infestations focused on where you're actually engaging. So instead of having it just randomly spawn on the other side of the map, having, now that you are spending your time in this plague territory, you've awoken this plague heart, and now, so it's that one will be the one sending on infestations. So it's in area you are been obviously interacting with. So it kind of keeps it limited to where, you are spending your playtime, so it's not as out of the way.
Is the player going to be able to tell on the map which plague hearts are awakened and which ones are not?
Yeah, we have some new UI for that kind of indicates which ones are sleeping and which ones are awake. So that's kind of the gist of it. And then once it's awake, they'll send infestations towards your base and try to siege you, kind of like before. But it keeps it a little more limited. And it also makes it so that then if you take out that plague heart that is awake, that then basically it will stop sending out infestations, and you can actually get a break from infestations. So one of the kind of ongoing mantras for the State of Decay franchise has been the idea of punctuated stillness. I think Doug Williams, our old art director, kind of always championed that idea, and that was kind of one of the core tenets behind State of Decay. And I think we've failed to deliver that with the previous version of the infestations. And so with this, the fact that you can actually take out the active plague hearts that are aware of you, and it gives you a little respite before the plague comes at you again. And it's, in this way, it's also, you have a lot more control over it. It's like, it's a consequence of your actions. So it's a less random, less feeling of a whack-a-mole, because you can stop it. And it's also your fault that it happened in the first place. So that's kind of the general idea behind that.
Making things the player's fault is actually a huge part of game design. Like, basically, if something goes wrong, you want to feel like you're responsible for it and that you can do something about it. It's when something is, it feels like it's not your fault, it's just happening to you randomly, that a game can get really frustrated. But thinking of it that way is, we don't usually think of it in those terms, making it the player's fault. That absolutely is what we're doing a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's when it's a lot harder for the player to blame the game when it's something that they have control over, and then it's because that's what you want. You don't have to feel like the things that you do actually have consequences and stakes, um, and that. But then you're also you're actually rewarded for your good actions too. So if you do are careful and you don't screw around, you don't make mistakes within plague territory, then you don't wake up anything, or if you take out a plague heart, then you're rewarded for that. um so yeah, it's really I think this is the thing that I'm most excited about. I feel like it's really, I know for me it's had a huge impact on how I play the game. Like I plague territory is horrifying to me now. Like it's this constant like, oh, because so one of the things that we have is that if a plague screamer screams while in plague territory, then it will wake up the heart. So
Oh, you
it
really
makes
have to be careful.
oh
Oh,
my god, it's so tense.
being careful.
It makes it really tense to try like be really careful and not have a screamer go off. Or if you do see a screamer, you got to sometimes like you're like, oh god, you're making sure you get that one shot before it screams, so that you don't wake up the plague heart. Yeah, it makes it tense being in plague territory now. Like yeah, I've been really enjoying.
That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to trying that out too. So,
Yeah.
in the notes for the stream, you also mentioned something called reinforcement hordes. What is that?
Oh yeah, that was so something else. Along the lines of trying to reinforce the idea that plague hearts are kind of what is driving the infestations. Um, Previously in the last round of infestations for the PTR, infestations would just kind of grow on their own. Like they basically kind of had a timer that was going, and then when that timer finished counting down, then it just went up to the next severity. So to try to, instead of doing that kind of background kind of simulation, we actually decided to just kind of essentially fully simulate it. So what we do now is have the plague heart actually send out a horde that travels to an existing infestation, and then when that horde reaches the infestation, then it becomes part of the infestation and it increases in severity. So not only does that kind of tie the infestations and plague hearts together a little stronger, but it also gives you another opportunity for kind of preventing them from growing. So it gives you another point in the system where you can poke at and have an opportunity for counterplay.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
So
so yeah,
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, so that means that basically instead of just you know the hordes only spreading and adding new infestations or causing sieges, now a lot of the hordes are just reinforcing existing infestations. I imagine, does that slow the growth a little bit too, so that you don't have as many moles to whack as the infestations are popping up?
yeah, a little bit, and that was kind of part of the idea as well. Is it does lengthen things, especially as they get farther across the map. It's harder for them to reinforce. It takes more time to reinforce things across the map.
Oh, that's
Um,
right. So these reinforcement hordes, can they only spawn from plague hearts, or can they spawn from one infestation to another?
they actually can go from one infestation to another. So basically, we have kind of this system of parentage with the infestations, where one infestation can send out a horde to infest a new site, which we had previously. But now that one also has the option of reinforcing any of its children infestations, so it can give up one of its severity levels to then send out a horde to then reinforce its child heart or child infestations. And so it's kind of this chain of reinforcement where the plague heart enforces its children, and then they enforce their children and whatnot. And so it's kind of this chain of moving hordes across the map,
Oh, wow.
essentially supporting each other.
It's like a bunch of rivers and their tributaries all flowing downhill. That's towards your base. Your base is downhill.
Yeah, yeah, essentially, yeah. It's basically what happens.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a little more, and it's a little more concrete instead of having just kind of this timer in the background that's trying to simulate the idea of like infestation somehow growing. Just make it a more concrete thing, like tangible thing the players can interact with and then see and understand. And yeah, I think it definitely helps reinforce the relationship, I think, with the plague hearts as well.
So we've got a few questions in the chat about the stuff you've already described. A couple of them are just comments. RXLS says, "I'm already afraid of plague hearts, and now this." And Soulburner LV replied, "Yeah, it's all fun and games until the plague heart starts freaking walking," which I don't think is a plan we currently have. Is to have them get up and walk around.
Not quite that, but
But
yeah.
Bokavarv wants to know what happens when there are no plague hearts left on the map. Is there still a way to get infestations now that we're dependent on plague hearts awakening in order to provide them?
So that's one of those things. I think when we talked about things coming in hot for the PTR, that's one of the things that we had wanted to address, and I mean we still I think plan to address it before we ship. But the way infestations worked previously is that they would kind of spontaneously spawn, basically on a timer, and so that's currently what we fall back to when you wipe out all the plague hearts on a map. I think we had talked before. I think I even mentioned this on a previous stream of wanting to, after the plague hearts are gone, having infestations instead spread from the map exits to kind of simulate them coming in from neighboring territory. We haven't got to implement that yet. And so, yeah, in the current system, it will kind of fall back to the old behavior to get some sporadic infestations on your map, just so that it's not gone entirely. But I think that's still something we need to address after the PTR. And there's also, things that we have to address within that. I think what we might have in the PTR might actually be a little funky, because one of the things we did for this whole like Plague Heart Awakening and kind of parentage system that we implemented is that if you kill a Plague Heart, then all its children infestations will wither away and eventually die on their own. So they need to be supported by their parent. And so you have this option of taking out the source of everything to kind of especially if things get out of control, it's a great way to kind of go to the root of the problem and not have to take out every single infestation. But it does have consequences where I think we still have issues with the end game where you've cleared all the plague hearts and now we're spontaneously spawning them. I don't think it quite handles it the way we want with this whole lack of a parent plague heart thing. So now I think those might actually wither and die. So that's something we know we have to address. It's going to be a little funky in the PTR. We're aware of that and we're going to address it, but it's just one of those things. It's yeah, that's kind of an issue that came up at the last minute that we realized. So it's still going to be, yeah, it's going to be a little funky for the PTR, but it's still something we want to take a look at after we actually get that new build pushed out.
But yeah, but taking it to the PTR is one great way to assess, exactly what's going on, right? We know there's going to be a problem. We don't know how bad the problem's going to be, and we don't know, getting some solid numbers on what the experience is actually like for players will I think help the team, put together the right response when it is time to sort of do the best version of the feature, which is good.
Yeah, and I think it really will also help just highlight other edge cases like that we hadn't thought of. When we make changes to the system, there's a lot of side effects, especially in a very complicated systems heavy game like State of Decay. So I'm sure there's going to be more things that we haven't thought of that we're going to need to address, and that's what the PTR is great for bringing those to the forefront.
So Sunny Games raised the question, what happens with the Plague Heart Awakening feature? What happens when you're playing in the lethal zone and there's just a bunch of hearts all on top of each other? If one screamer goes off, will they awaken 5 hearts at once?
It can, yes. You can get yourself into some bad situations in lethal. You have to be I'm sure Joe can talk to that a lot. But I mean, it's something we're constantly tuning also is what the different triggers are, and we have it's also tunable across difficulty. So that's one of the things I think we're going to try to get from the PTR is how easy or difficult is it to awaken plague hearts on the different difficulties? Is it too easy to wake up too many? Is it too easy to avoid awakening any? So it's a constant kind of balancing act there to make sure that it actually feels right. But it's definitely trickier on something like lethal where you have a lot of dense plague territory. You gotta be even more careful. So yeah.
So another point that you raised in our notes was about how sieges are triggered. That might be another thing that's changing the PTR. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So that was one of the other things that came up from the last round of PTR was kind of the the idea, the way that sieges were being launched, just felt a little funky. Like it was kind of this like once you had infestations that got within range of your base, they kind of sent this constant trickle of siege hordes towards your base. Um, and it just felt like this constant onslaught. And because there were so many, and they were kind of so easy to miss that it just became like a very confusing system where you didn't know, like a lot of times players didn't even know they were being sieged because it wasn't obvious enough, it wasn't a big enough of event. And it was just so constant that you start having to ignore it and you just can't address it constantly. So we wanted to address that and make it make it more of an event that the player that would be hard to miss. And so one of the changes that we made was to make it so that essentially when infestations get near your base, that basically, there's essentially like launching points where within, a range of your base where, the infestations can launch sieges. So they have certain sites that they'll go to. And then those are like the launching points. And basically that's kind of what matters for determining whether a siege can happen. Um, and basically what happens now is when it decides that it's time to launch a siege, instead of it being each individual infestation launching their own siege hordes whenever they feel like, it's kind of this coordinated effort. And so it's like the system as a whole kind of decides, okay, it's time, we're going to siege the player. And then all those nearby infestations launch hordes at the player's base. And previously it was basically the siege mission would kick off and it was just we'd spawn zombies kind of around the player's base and they just randomly come kind of trickle in. So now it will actually send hordes towards your base from all these nearby infestations. And then basically when the hordes get to the edge of your safe zone, they'll stop and they'll wait for the other hordes to arrive before they march in. And you'll actually hear like the screamers, like as they're sitting there waiting for their buddies to arrive, the screamers will start screaming. And just almost like this, like pre-war battle cry. It's pretty horrifying.
It sounds pretty
like
creepy.
You're in your base. No, it's great. Like the first time I experienced, I couldn't see what was happening, but I just heard these screams all around me, and it was pretty terrifying. And then some they'll wait, and then once all their buddies have gotten to the edge of the safe zone, then they'll all march in together. But they're actual hordes this time instead of randomly spawned zombies. And then they'll send out waves of them depending on the severity of the infestations that are around. That'll be like essentially the number of waves that they can send out. But again, it's about taking it from this kind of like abstract kind of background simulation to turning it into a more tangible like representation of this stuff. So them actually sending hordes from the infestations themselves.
So will those hordes contain like the same like freaks and things that would normally come with an infestation?
For the most part, that's another thing I should touch on. We've also tweaked what is in an infestation. So previously it was just screamers and regular zombies. We've added all sorts of freaks to infestation now as well.
No,
that was something else that came out of the feedback, was wanting just better variety infestations and making them a more interesting challenge to tackle. So along with that also means that what gets sent to your base is also more interesting and scary. So yeah, but it's basically made up of the zombies that are in the infestations themselves. So depending on what that makeup is, so it's a little more 1-to-1 of the infestations to the actual sieges now.
It's a little bit more simulated, less random, which sounds great actually.
Yeah. No, it's pretty great. I've always found the previous versions of sieges to be a little, I don't know, I don't want to say boring, but boring. Just because a lot of times they just ended like, it was all based on noise before. And I always had pretty low noise when a siege launched. And so I never got anything that was very interesting. They're pretty big events now. And so, it feels a lot more immersive, I think. So that was one of the other big changes we did to kind of address feedback from the PTR.
That sounds great. So what about updates to the infestation radio commands? What's that about?
Yeah, so some more of the feedback we got, and we kind of knew this going in. So we we implemented redo commands to kind of help the player manage infestations a little better. Take advantage of the fact that you do have a community. You are not the only person in your community, so take advantage of the other members of your community to help out with not only just like clearing infestations but also scouting them more. But the version that we had in the last round of the public test realm was very much like an early prototype of just trying to get the functionality up and running. And so some of the feedback that came back from the PTR was that it didn't feel very grounded, and it felt very like debuggy, because it essentially was. It was like almost this instantaneous command where you say, "Hey, I want help clearing out an infestation," and it would do that in like almost right away. And so now we've kind of taken some effort to kind of simulate those like as if you actually are sending out someone into the field and they're going and actually doing those things a little bit better to make it feel a little more grounded and feel like it fits within State of Decay. So yeah, kind of make it seem like there's actually something like going around the map and scouting, or going to an infestation and tackling it. So just the way it's presented, the way the mission flows, how long it takes, stuff like that has kind of been tweaked to make it feel a lot more grounded.
Oh, that's really cool. Like that's given the way that our system works, that's a really difficult thing to pull off. So I'm
Yeah, and working with the mission system can be pretty tricky. So it's definitely it's a hard thing to manage. And just there's a lot of stuff in the game that wasn't meant to really simulate the community members doing stuff like that. But I think it's great because that's kind of State of Decay 1 did that a bit. They did a little bit more of that, simulating community members going out and actually doing things around the map. So I think it's great that we're actually starting to bring back some of that and kind of take advantage of the fact that you have a full community and not just you. So yeah, I think that's also coming on really well. I'm liking that.
And you've got one other thing on the list that I find fascinating, and that is outpost defenses.
This has been mentioned already a few times in here. So this is something. This has been on my mind for a long time, because State of Decay 1 had the option to put landmines in the safe zone around your outpost. And that's something we've been kind of talking about, and like, wow, that'd be really great to bring that back. And then we were thinking like maybe it makes sense with infestations, because now that they're attacking you more directly, to focus on defense a little bit more.
Yeah, because
and then the PTR
sieges in State of Decay 1 work that way. It's like it would be hordes crossing the map, and if you managed to put obstacles in the way of those hordes, or mines in the way of those hordes, they wouldn't be able to siege you, and you could actually like really tactically plan out on the map. And that's something you've never been able to do in State of Decay 2.
That was one of my favorite things from 1. Like most of how I chose Outpost was about like what territory do they cover to basically block zombies from getting to my base. It felt very tactical, so I really loved that. But then from the PTR, we got a lot of feedback of players saying, "Hey, I would love to see landmines come back." And so I think for us, it was like, okay, well, we're talking about this anyways, and now the feedback's kind of reinforcing this idea. It just feels like the right time to kind of bring back that concept. So we did. So we brought back the idea of being able to set landmines down at an outpost, and so basically any hordes, or I think like zombies in general, that wander into your safe zone will get blown up. But we've also added some other outpost defenses as well. We added, I think, one called Signal Disruptor, which is kind of it's I think for cell towers, which the idea is like having this signal that kind of basically creates kind of large scale noise to basically kind of confuse the zombies and essentially slow the infestation spread rate. And then we also have one that's basically it's like a zombie bait, essentially, that basically will kind of redirect zombie hordes that are like infesting hordes and stuff like that, reinforcement hordes that are going to reinforce an infestation or take out a new site, or maybe even they're on their way to your base, to redirect them as well. So we've got a few new sets of options for outpost defenses and ways to kind of fight back against the infestation system without it just being manual combat. So trying to give you a little more strategic options and just things I think that are just a little more fitting for the fantasy as well. that just feel right. That is, it's more than just combat. It's also just how you build your base and how do you prep your outposts and all that stuff.
So we've got a couple of
So
questions in the chat again about sort of defense options that the player has. Christian Coates and Emeraldkin both want to know how does the Haven device work in this new world? What does it do with sieges?
that's something. So that's one of the things I think, and mostly will be worked on after the PTR. That's just it wasn't the one of the main things. We just had so much other high priority things that we were working on that affect everyone that we needed to nail out.
It's always been
so
kind of a weird new layer, like sort of a special case exception on top of the siege system, and so keeping it there, it feels like the right move. Yeah.
And it's something that after rework the system, we realized we're gonna have to change how the Haven device works, because it was built around the way everything else worked prior, and a lot of that stuff just doesn't make sense anymore. So we're still kind of we have some good ideas of what we're gonna do to it. It's probably not gonna be as OP as it was before, I would say.
Yeah.
'Cause before it entirely prevented sieges. I think it'll probably help mitigate them a lot, but it might not be as powerful.
And
but we still
sieges are sort of a bigger and rarer sort of event, and that feels more appropriate. Like in the current version of the game that's just out there live in the world right now, sieges happen on a regular clock. They're really common. They're really frequent. And just making them go away felt like the right move. But if they're the pinnacle of a simulated event, and the way that you're talking about changing them, where it's instead of it just happening all the time whenever a horde shows up, they're coordinated. They're happening at certain times. They feel like a really big event. Having them just be mitigated by the Haven device feels totally in bounds to me.
Yeah, so we haven't done much to the Haven device, really anything for this PTR build. I think the moment to moment experience will largely be the same, because the Haven device, it will, after a certain amount of time, it will pop zombie heads. So that's still in place. And I don't even with I think especially with the kind of large scale sieges that we have now, I think it'll be less, because you've got a bunch of zombies coming at once. It popping zombies kind of slowly, it'll be helpful, but it's not, even now, I don't think it's going to completely mitigate the siege entirely. But it's also, I think it's the away from base experience of when you're away from base. I don't think we haven't addressed that at all, so that it probably won't have really any effect in this current PTR build, but that's something we're going to address before we ship. Yeah, they remind me. There was something else about the sieges. Oh, one of the other things we're doing, it reminded me, I didn't touch on this for the sieges, is that we're also, so previously with the way sieges worked is that if you weren't there when the siege mission launched, then it basically it subtracted 3 ammo from you, and said, okay, the community members defended the base, you lose 3 ammo, and that's that.
Fine,
which
yeah.
meant that, like, if you were like 5 seconds late to getting to your base for that siege, you missed, it just disappears, and then you pay all the penalty. Now what we're doing is kind of rolling out the consequences for a siege as the waves progress. So if you miss, like, say, the first wave of a siege, it'll be like, oh, so and so got injured, or some consequence for that first wave. But then you can still arrive late to a siege and participate in the remaining waves. So it's kind of, even when you're away from the base, it simulates the siege still going on, so that you can be late to a siege, and you can, like, have that feeling of like, oh, I arrived right at the last minute and I saved the day, instead of it being like, oh, I was 5 seconds late and so it's over. So that was something we're addressing as well, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, that sounds like a really big improvement. We had another question from the chat. Let's see here. Who was it that did this one? Somebody asked. Oh yeah, there we go. MRD Gaming wants to know: does the loot in a plague heart change after it gets awakened? Like, is it now a harder plague heart that gives you more prizes, or is it the same no matter when and how you kill them? And can you stealth kill plague hearts? Is another question that we've got from Ice.
You can't. No, you can't. I mean, you can't stealth. So attacking a plague heart directly is one of the triggers that is 100%. That if you hit it at all, do any damage to it, it will wake up the plague heart. So I don't think it's possible really to to stealth wake up a plague. But so no, we don't have any different loot for the plague heart. And it's not like the plague heart itself becomes, the idea isn't really that it becomes harder once in awaken. It's just more that it's now aware of your presence. And so now is just kind of trying to seek you out as a threat and eliminate your base because it sees you as a threat. So it's more just about it being aware that you are on the map than it really being different when it's awake versus dormant.
So if a player, I think, along the lines of the stealth killing, like if a player kills there's a freaking juggernaut on here. If a player kills a plague heart, basically the moment it's awakened, like oh crap, I've awakened a plague heart, I'm gonna kill it right now. Oh, I've awakened another plague heart, I'm gonna kill it right now. Will they basically not have any infestations if they just always kill a plague heart the moment they awaken it, or is it difficult to run around and kill every plague heart you awaken?
You, at least early game, you currently can do that. I mean, it's one thing to be able to always take it. I know for me, I'm not able to take out a plague heart whenever I want.
Yeah, same here.
Especially on the harder difficulties. Like I know I personally need to prep. And
even
it might
just emotionally, I have to prepare myself before I can go.
Oh, exactly. So I mean, maybe there's some people that are always ready to take out plague hearts, and that might be the way that they can play. But even in our current build that's going to PTR, like late game, if you we do have this mechanism so that later on through the plague heart progression, whereas if you do kill a plague heart, there is a chance it will awaken other plague hearts, kind of like react to like, oh, our system is being taken down. So there is a chance if you do that, you are still going to wake up other plague hearts, aside from the ones that you just killed. So
especially
there's
I imagine if you're playing on lethal and they're all really close together, like per Sunny Games' question. I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm making stuff up. So I don't know anything about this feature, so don't listen to me.
No, I mean that's pretty like, so if you kill a plague heart within another plague heart's territory, there's a chance that you're going to wake up that other plague heart, especially if like on lethal or something there's a cluster. So it's definitely not that straightforward to just constantly go and kill all the plague hearts. You'd be, especially in harder difficulties, I think it's tough. You'd have to have the right gear and everything and really be ready for that. But yeah, I think, and part of the idea is that you should be able to get to points where you can get a break in the system, where if you kill all the active plague hearts and you don't wake up anymore, you can get up here where it's like, okay, I don't have to deal with infestations for a while. And then I can focus on building up my community, building up my base, and kind of all the rest of parts of the game. And I think a lot of times, I think what I'm finding in practice is that the idea of like, I just won't wake up plague hearts is a great idea in theory. Like, no, I mean, in that, like, you're like, oh, well, I'm never going to have infestations because I'm just going to be really careful and not go into plague territory. But then you're constantly going into plague territory for missions and for just getting gear, lots of different things. And then I'm like, I'm going to be really careful. And then I do something stupid and I wake up a plague heart. Like,
yeah.
So in practice, I think it's ended up being a pretty good balance so far. But I think, again, we still need large scale testing to see, like, even like, is that late game stuff, those systems we have to like wake up other plague hearts, maybe that's too much and becomes overwhelming. So that's something we kind of still need to pay attention to. And it's going to be a kind of constant balancing act to make sure it's reactive enough, but is not too overwhelming for the player.
So we are completely out of time, but I had one more question from the chat that I just wanted to quickly throw out there because I think it probably has a quick answer. Aswell wants to know, will radios and firecrackers, will noisemakers basically wake up plague hearts? Is it going to be that literal, or is it more a different list of events?
No, not right now. I mean, that's something we kind of actually toyed with the idea of when we were doing a plague testing, like whether being loud and obnoxious in plague territory should wake up a plague heart. But I think what's the triggers we ended up having, like, initially was enough to make it so you had a good chance of waking up plague hearts. So right now it's not noise based. It's mostly based on your interaction with zombies. So no, not at the moment. But we've thought about it, and we'll see, depending on what our feedback comes back from the PTR, that maybe we do want to do something like that. If we do need more triggers to let you wake up plague hearts, but
yeah, like if you
currently no.
Like if you get a bunch of data that shows that players are just never waking up plague hearts, then you're going to want more triggers. But we have to see how players actually behave in the wild, because you all playtesting the game internally, you know how you planned the features. You're going to kind of play the ideal way, whether you like it or not. But finding out what
Yeah.
players do is going to potentially change everything. And so yeah, you have all these. It's cool that you've got these sort of like open ideas. You've come up with solutions that you could use, that you could kick in, depending on what you see from players. So
Yeah, exactly. Having all these like fallback options for, oh, if this problem comes up, we can then do this. But we're not going to do it yet. We got to make sure that's a problem first.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for spending all of this time with us, Eric, and sort of filling us in on what's going on in the PTR. I know that the audience, I mean, there's the chat is hopping. I'm sorry, audience, by the way, that I was not able to get all of your questions. I grabbed the ones that I could that seemed like they were relevant, but we are just out of time. So feel free, by the way, to to ask us questions on social media. Follow us at State of Decay. You can follow me at Rangatang if you care, and ask me questions, and I'll be like, I don't know, I'm not Eric Anderson. And that'll be a big waste of your time, actually. But anyway, really happy to have you on here, Eric. Thank you so much for coming in and talking this through.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun, so I appreciate it.
Well, let's wrap this up and get out of here. So our last stream of 2022 is going to be on December 5th, and then we're going to take a nice holiday break and be back to see you again in the new year, probably around, I think, January 9th. So if you're marking your calendars, there's where you mark them. Our last stream is probably going to be a year in review with me and Brant and Joe, just sort of going over what's happened in State of Decay 2 this year. And I guess we'll see you there. See you later. After 20 seconds of looking at this shark hoodie guy, check him out and all the clickable buttons around him. Oh, aren't they great? Can't you see them all? They're beautiful.
This is the best part of the whole show.